Baltic Sea, from Copenhagen to St. Petersburg, the backdrop for centuries of conflict. Today, the region faces a new strategic test as three small former Soviet republics rely on the West to deter a resurgent and unpredictable Russia.
A serious issue, but the Baltic is fun, too. So, along with my wife, Irma Hawkins, let's dip our toes into the waters and explore this intriguing 21st century frontier. For many Americans, impressions of the Baltic are limited to herring appetizers, but there's so much more. 9 northern European countries border the Baltic. We joined a small group tour of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Together, they are relatively untraveled, only 400 miles north to south, none of them much larger than the U.S. state of West Virginia. I had personal reasons for going. For one thing, a 30-year friendship in California with Lena Barron from the Estonian island of Hiiumaa. And my paternal grandmother had grown up under her pious mother's wing in the small town of Ariogala, Lithuania. The presidents of the 3 Baltic countries made rare news when they met with President Donald Trump at the White House on April 3, 2018. They were Dalia Grybauskaitė of Lithuania, Raimons Vejonis of Latvia, Kersti Kaljulaid of Estonia. The Baltic leaders assured Trump that they are meeting his demand to spend 2% of their economic output on defense. Their objective, convincing the wavering Trump to honor NATO defense pledges. These vulnerable U.S. ally nations trembled when Russian President Vladimir Putin seized the Crimea and started a war in eastern Ukraine in 2014. Russia staged a massive, frightening military exercise next door in Belarus in September 2017. The 3 countries have the historic misfortune to be flat, thinly populated, squeezed between bigger powers. Sweden, Denmark, Poland, Germany, and Russia have taken turns rolling over these plains since the 13th century. And through a dark history, that's how all those touristy churches, castles, palaces, and walls got there. For 200 years, crusading German knights of the Brothers of the Sword, Teutonic Order, and Livonian Order fell upon the pagan, nature-worshipping Eastern princes to bludgeon them into Christianity. In the Crusaders' wake, German merchants added new Baltic ports to their Hanseatic League monopoly on trade. Nobles, bishops, and traders of German ancestry lorded it over Estonians and Latvians like colonizers for 700 years. Lithuania, more united, defeated the Germans for independence at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. But in 1413 became the last European country to accept Christianity. Lithuanians and their Latvian cousins, who are also known as Lets, are ethnic Balts, like the James Bond character Goldfinger. Estonians are Finno-Ugric, relatives of Finns and Hungarians. Tallinn, Estonia's capital, is just 50 miles across the Gulf of Finland from Helsinki. While suppressed Estonia and Latvia were never on the map of nations until 1918, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was Europe's largest state in the 15th century. Grand Duke Vytautas the Great expanded its territory from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Through royal marriage, Lithuania became a jointly ruled commonwealth with rising Poland, Lithuania eventually a junior partner. Ivan the Terrible of Russia wrested some Baltic shoreline from Poland-Lithuania late in the 16th century, but lost it to Sweden. The 100-year royal Swedish rule over Estonian and Latvian serfs was benevolent. They got the Bible in local languages, peasant education, and lasting Lutheranism. Lithuania, influenced by Poland, stayed devoutly Roman Catholic. For Russia, Tsar Peter the Great finally opened a window on the Baltic. In the 21-year Great Northern War, Peter destroyed Sweden as a regional power and founded St. Petersburg in 1703. To the south, a weakened Poland was carved up in the 18th century. Catherine the Great added Lithuania to the Russian Empire's Estonia and Latvia in 1795. Tsar Alexander I freed the peasant serfs in Estonia and Latvia from 1811 to 1819. Alexander II liberated Lithuanian and Russian serfs in 1861. Emancipated, the Baltic serfs crawled out from under the doormat of history. They exulted in great 19th century revivals of their languages and folk tales. New plays, novels, songs, and anthems emerged. The proud nationalism continues today. The luckless Tsar Nicholas II fumbled the Baltic lands to Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany in World War I. Within hours of Germany's defeat in November 1918, the territories declared independence. Vladimir Lenin tried to grab the three fledgling nations back for the Bolshevik USSR, but his Red Army failed. Real freedom and democracy did not last long. By the mid-1930s, more fearful of Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union than of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, the three Baltic countries had turned to dictators. The fascist Antanas Smetona ruled in Lithuania, Karlis Ulmanis in Latvia, Konstantin Pats in Estonia. Betraying their friendship, Hitler seized the old Hanseatic port city of Memel from Lithuania in March 1939. That August, the cynical Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact secretly divided Eastern Europe between the Nazis and Communist Russia. A week later, Hitler invaded Poland, sparking World War II. Stalin's troops and commissars rolled west to snuff out the three Baltic states. Moscow liquidated or deported to Siberia 150,000 people deemed threats to communist rule. June 22, 1941. Launching Operation Barbarossa, Hitler turned on Soviet Russia along a 1,000-mile front. German divisions overran the Baltic people, who often welcomed them as liberators. SS units murdered every Jew they could find, 445,000 in the three lands. In 1944, the Red Army made a destructive but decisive comeback. For the next 47 years, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were trapped in a Soviet bear hug. Communist planners stocked Baltic towns with Russian factory workers, diluting native numbers, planting the seeds of current social tensions. The restive Baltics played key roles in the breakup of the USSR. On the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1989, 2 million people joined hands in a 400-mile human chain from Tallinn through Riga, Latvia, and down to Vilnius, Lithuania. There's an unspoken demand for restored independence. The silence found a voice in music-loving Estonia's singing revolution. At one song festival in Tallinn, 300,000 people crowded together to sing banned national songs. In March 1990, Lithuania's Soviet parliament boldly declared independence. Mikhail Gorbachev slapped back with troop maneuvers and a fuel blockade. Vilnius backtracked. In January 1991, Moscow hardliners ordered troops to seize the TV towers in feisty Vilnius and Riga. 18 civilians were killed, hundreds injured. At year's end, the Soviet Union collapsed. 3 newly recognized nations joyously joined the world. To safeguard their gains, they aligned with the European Union and NATO. Now they all use the euro. From Soviet times, the Baltic nations retain an ironic sense of humor. In Klaipeda, Lithuania, the former Germanic Memel, you can visit the Museum of Minor Lithuanian History. And the country's name in Lithuanian is Lietuva, which simply means it rains here. In fact, there's something disarmingly offbeat about the whole area. At a Riga restaurant, our tour group gawked at the owner's parrot chowing down at the next table. Another common factor, impenetrable, mutually incomprehensible languages. The Indo-European Lithuanian tongue has words left over from Sanskrit. To communicate, residents of the separate countries use a third language, Russian for older people, English for younger. Lithuania and Latvia share a passion for basketball and for the NBA. Think of Arvydas Sabonis of the Celtics and Blazers, Kristaps Porzingis of the Knicks. Also in common, traditional wooden houses with sharply peaked roofs, skimpy paper napkins in restaurants, and narrow single beds may be one explanation for dangerously low birth rates. The 3 neighbors are losing population at a fast clip. Low salaries and high prices drive doctors, engineers, and other skilled workers to higher-paying countries. And Liudas Dapkus of the Associated Press in Vilnius says people worry, perhaps too much right now, that Putin will invade. Yet there's no doubt, says Latvian political scientist Martin Staugulis, that Russia stirs internal conflict through Facebook trolls and propaganda on Russian-language TV. Latvia and Estonia regard their sizable Russian minorities with suspicion, discriminating in voting rights and in requirements to speak the native language. The 3 nations are a bit off the beaten track for tourism. They are desperate for more. In Tallinn, 90% of tourists arrive on Baltic summer cruise ships, but they dock for only half a day and they don't spend much, says Annalie Kritzman, a former staffer at Estonian embassies abroad. To experience more than cruise passengers do, Irma and I flew to Vilnius from Copenhagen to start the 3-country journey by bus. Vilnius, charming capital of a nation of 2.8 million people, down from 3.7 million at independence. After nosediving in the 2008 financial crisis, as Liudas Dapkus tells our group, the economy has been growing 4 to 5% a year. There's even a labor shortage. We meet our group at the old worldy Mabra Residence Hotel, a former monastery. And we are off in our Chinese bus with Pavel Bazarov, Pasha, our Estonian-Russian tour director. Driver Vitas teaches us Labas Rytas, Lithuanian for good morning. A ruined hill castle from the 1200s marks Vilnius's founding at the junction of the Neris and Vilna rivers. Cole Porter at least found Lithuanian settings very romantic.
Birds do it, bees do it, even educated fleas do it. Let's do it, let's fall in love. In Spain the best upper sets do it, Lithuanians, and let's do it, let's do it, let's fall in love.
Town Hall Square is actually triangular. Nearby, another sign of Baltic quirkiness, a memorial to the late American rocker Frank Zappa and his anti-establishment Mothers of Invention, installed by his Vilnius fan club. It happens that as a reporter, I knew Frank Zappa, profiling him for Newsweek. Darker memories survive at the TV tower and at another scene of 1991 bloodshed, the House of the 141-member Parliament, led by a conservative coalition. While Parliament in Latvia and Estonia selects the presidential palace in Vilnius is occupied by a leader directly elected by the people. Pavel Lutomsky, a Stanford professor on the tour who emigrated from communist Poland, shared his early impressions.
Short of a miracle what has happened, even though it's been already 25 years. It's clean, it's orderly, it's optimistic, it's fair, I hope, more transparent than it used to be. Impressive that they got there from nowhere, from zero actually. They had zero money, they had zero ideas how to make money, and they had no idea about democratic governance or self-governance. And now it's very impressive, I think.
As a local guide tells our group, Cathedral Square has an equestrian statue of Grand Duke Gediminas. He founded Vilnius and in 1323 invited Jews to settle in Lithuania. The country was a major Jewish cultural center for 600 years. But when sightseers go anywhere in Europe, they're going to be shepherded to lots of churches. Vilnius is no exception. Compare and contrast the architecture of Gothic and Baroque Catholic churches with Russian Orthodox cathedrals. For me, the standout was the Old Town Church where Peter the Great baptized the Ethiopian great-grandfather of Russia's finest poet, Alexander Pushkin. The old towns of Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. A stroll through narrow Vilnius lanes brought us to the 19th century lodgings of Adam Mickiewicz, inspiring poet and Polish activist raised in Vilnius. Pilies Gatve, Castle Street, the main pedestrian drag of Old Town. At the Dvaras restaurant, we ordered zeppelins, boiled potato dumplings. Good stuff. In the Old Town, the remains of the once thriving Vilnius ghetto. Street posters and faded albums tell the story. How Jews were 70,000 of the city's 200,000, accomplished people like violinist Yasha Heifetz. The 8 synagogues are now 2. In 1948, the Soviet government pulled down the ancient Great Synagogue for a park and playground. Near the ironic ghetto intersection of Jew Street and German Street, reminders of the Vilna Gaon, 18th century rabbi and sage. It seems as if half the Jews in America, including my family, claim descent from him, though it's hard to prove. A day trip 17 miles west to lakeside Trakai, Lithuania's medieval capital under Vytautas. The 2 castles were built to fend off those pesky German crusaders. On Karaitis Street, the wooden houses and Kanessa, the temple of one of the world's smallest religions. 70 karaimai out of Lithuania's 200 live here. Restaurant manager Arturas Lavrinovicius told us how some Crimean Tatars converted to observe the Torah, the law of Moses, using Hebrew letters for their Turkic language. Vytautas brought 300 from the Crimea as bodyguards. Here we learned to twist dough into kibun, baked meat or veggie karaita pastries. They were a hit with us amateur chefs.
These are like corn.
On the road again to the Rumsiskas Open-Air Museum, a kind of peasant Disneyland presenting the regional customs and costumes of Lithuania, where even city dwellers love to go mushrooming in the heavy forests. A replica village of around 1900 displays small-town life then, with a church at center, but with acceptance of Jews in apartments like this, with the mezuzah on the door and a loaf of challah on the table. Evil winds destroyed this way of life. In a memorial grove for Stalin's deportation victims, 90-year-old Irena Spałkowskiena grimly related how at age 13 she was shipped in a boxcar to the Soviet Arctic and later to Siberia with her father, mother, and brother. The father, a Lithuanian army officer, was executed. The mother worked and starved to death. Balts and Estonians do not forget Soviet cruelty. The three nations present horrifying museums of KGB atrocities to tourists. Northwest to Kaunas, Lithuanian's second city, which served as capital of the post-World War I Republic because Poland was occupying Vilnius. We found Kaunas a festive city, preparing for a papal visit in September 2018, kissing brides and grooms at the former town hall, now the Palace of Weddings, celebrating Hanseatic Days at the restored Kaunas Castle. Off the national highway, ancestral Ariogala. Here in the Russian Empire's confining Pale of Jewish settlement, Malka Friedland defied her rich family by marrying Hirsch Elijah Shlyomovich, an impoverished scholar. With daughter Miriam and their other children, they left Ariogala by horse cart in the 1870s for Rostov-on-Don, 900 miles south and beyond the Pale. In Rostov, Miriam fell in love with Isaac Kazintsov, the son of this couple, Yael and Molly Kazintsov. The lovers took ship for America in 1886 and married in New York. They were my father's parents. And then to Ariogala, 55 years later, came SS Standartenführer Karl Jäger and his Einsatzkommando 3. The unit machine-gunned all 662 Jews in my family's old town. It was no surprise that I could find no traces of the family, certainly not in the Christian cemetery, and yet it was a stirring thing to be there.
A circle has been completed from these old country streets to a more welcoming land and now back to honor the courage and sacrifices of those generations.
Klaipeda, Lithuania's only seaport, for nearly 700 years was the Prussian town of Memel. The Versailles Treaty yanked the city from Germany in 1919. Hitler swiped it back. From the town hall balcony, the Führer bellowed in gloating triumph to the mostly German-descended populace. That balcony is still there, and frankly, the Hitler connection gave me chills. We stayed around the corner at the Old National Hotel. Outside a nearby restaurant, we encountered the happier sounds of L-pop. In Klaipeda harbor, post-Soviet Lithuania countered coercive Russian oil and gas pipeline prices in 2014 by constructing a liquefied natural gas terminal. Cheaper gas imports from Norway have made Lithuania energy independent of Moscow. By car ferry across a river-fed freshwater lagoon, Klaipeda is the gateway to a vacation land, the Curonian Spit, a skinny peninsula 61 miles long between the lagoon and the Baltic Sea. The southern half of the Spit belongs to the Russian enclave region of Kaliningrad, the former Prussian Königsberg. A Russian guard tower signifies the tense border between NATO and Putin. A drive on the Spit past forests of tall Baltic pine to the Hill of Witches, a whimsical collection of oak carvings from pagan Lithuanian fairy tales.
How to make dough.
Amber jewelry, largely from the Curonian Spit, is one of Lithuania's chief export products. Amber is fossilized tree resin formed in the Eocene era, often with insects or plants sealed in for 50 million years. Tourists have a chance to find their own amber on the broad, storm-washed beaches of the Spit. Our tour group of 14 went amber hunting. Search around seaweed, we were advised. I could find only boring rocks. The women, notably Marilyn Wong, Janet Leviton, and Carol Bailey, had much more success. Not enough for a big payday, but gratifying. We celebrated with restaurant owner Vida Zarnaskiena, who led a fisherman's song in the local Samogitian dialect. Let's sing, let's clap. Down at Nida, near the Russian border, Judita Eisenyena taught the travelers the art of making amber pendants.
Every year, don't worry. You can work. I don't know you, yes, and I didn't tell you to run, yes.
Back on the mainland and east to Ioniscus and the devotional, patriotic Hill of Crosses. Pope John Paul II visited, blessing the unusual sight from this platform in 1993. Nobody knows when or how it started, but Lithuanian Catholics defying Soviet atheism began erecting crosses on the hill. As soon as officials destroyed them, new ones sprang up. You can buy and add your own crucifix to the 200,000 already there. In a lighter vein over lunch in Šiauliai, Pasha played an out-of-tune piano. Irma tried some blues. As Liudas Dapkus summed it up, Lithuania is a happy country which has issues, but is trying its best to be a sane country. North from Lithuania into Latvia, across a border that's not even a stop sign between the two EU members. Slightly smaller than Lithuania, Latvia has only 1.9 million people. In the Great Recession, 300,000 left the country. Martin Staugulis, briefing us, said the economy is struggling. The EU supplies a quarter of the government budget, paying for roads, bridges, education. The Germans, he explained, need Latvians to buy Mercedes-Benzes and Porsches. Unemployment is fairly high with troubling income inequality. Thanks to Soviet industrial policies, 26% of Latvia's population is Russian. Moscow has raised fears with warnings about official discrimination against these Russians in eligibility for citizenship and in requirements to speak Latvian. Estonia is in the same situation. Latvians take special pride in Winter Olympic success. The two-man bobsled won bronze at Pyeongchang, South Korea in 2018. Lugers and the four-man sled medaled at Sochi, Russia in 2014. Five-time skeleton world champion Martins Dukurs won silver at Vancouver in 2010. Our first stop, the Rococo 18th century Rundala Palace, now home to nobody but a stork. It was built for Johannes von Buren, Duke of Kurland, influential lover of Peter the Great's niece, the Russian Empress Anna. 3 weeks after her death, vengeful courtiers arrested the Duke and exiled him to Siberia for 12 years. Riga, at 621,000, the biggest city in the Baltic states, the liveliest, the most cosmopolitan. Mikhail Baryshnikov trained at the Riga Ballet. A Stalinist wedding cake tower evokes the Soviet past. Now the Russian embassy is a deceptively modest outpost of the giant neighbor. The 1935 Freedom Tower reminds Latvians to treasure independence, just as street footprints commemorate the 1989 anti-Soviet human chain. Some German touches remain. The name of our hotel, the Hestia Hotel Jugend, oddly reminded me of the Hitler Jugend, Hitler Youth. And the elevator? You could call it Schindler's Lift. The hotel courtyard had an adorable attraction, though. Little Buchki. As we scouted Riga, local guide Baiba Levina claimed that Latvian women are the world's tallest. As I tried in vain to confirm that, we were viewing the 18th century barracks for Russian soldiers. The parliament, controlled by centrist and leftist parties. The opera house with adjoining park. The Powder Tower from 1300 and old city walls. Riga has Europe's largest collection of Art Nouveau buildings from around 1900, mostly upscale apartment blocks. It's one hope for attracting more tourism. The busy central market is housed in 5 World War I Zeppelin hangars. Here you can buy everything from fruits and vegetables to, yes, herring and other Baltic catches. Riga also has a cat house. Wait, here's the story. The ethnic German snobs of the Merchants Guild denied membership to a rich guy because he was Latvian. He built a mansion facing the guild, aiming felines' rear ends at the members. They sued, and when he agreed to turn the kiddies around, they admitted him. For every old structure in Riga, there is something modern, like the National Library, or a Santiago Calatrava Bridge, or the Laimu Chocolates Clock, that's a dating rendezvous site, and McDonald's. For a change from cities, overseas adventure travel bussed us out to Ligatne for breakfast and lunch with 2 Latvian families to see how rural people live. The Vanagi family owns a small winery and a wood products factory. They bottle wine out of everything you can think of. Dandelions, rhubarb, berries, even a few grapes. Elita Vanaga did the pouring and the toasting in Latvian.
Priekā. Okay.
25-year-old Cynthia Vanaga showed us the woodworking shop with her brother Christas and his fiancée. Cynthia backgrounded us about why only in recent years has the family learned much about its history.
In Soviet times, there was one unwritten rule that you should keep your mouth shut. because you couldn't trust your colleagues, you couldn't trust your neighbors, maybe even friends, because you didn't know who are the spies in society. And that's why people didn't tell a lot about themselves. They didn't tell anything about history. When Latvia got back independence, then people understood that Soviets aren't coming back and we can open the mouth. And my grandmother actually loves talking. So she interviewed many local people. She went to archives, searched for facts, and my grandmother made our family tree, Vanagi tree. She made her tree, Wences tree. Now we know about 10 people in the picture.
Grandma was Rasma Vanaga, age 75. A widow with a new boyfriend, she welcomed us into her 500-square-foot apartment. For 44 years, she worked at a paper-making mill, now closed, rising to deputy director. Rasma Vanaga subsists on $300 a month in Social Security, though utilities cost $150 a month in the long winters. The Soviet collapse brought hard times, confusion. With some ambivalence, she says, "In principle, I welcomed independence. I was happy, but a lot of things we expected to happen right away never did. Leaders enriched themselves, took advantage. Ordinary people did not know what steps to take." The folks providing lunch were Normunds and Kristina Lauva. Their life in the countryside, a mixture of Latvia's agricultural roots and 21st century technology. Normunds is a software engineer and website designer. At the same time, the couple grows vegetables, they're finishing a sauna, and they're planning a guest house. Many in Latvia are struggling in the new capitalism, said Normunds, in a cold bath from state-planned communist ways that killed personal initiative. Social services are minimal. Things are improving, he says, but only through hard work. And there is always Russia to think about.
Will she act towards our direction? We certainly feel that not really right now, but the situation may change. Latvia has done a great deal in getting into the NATO and the European Union, so it really, not always it protects our interests, but in terms of security, it gives us the needed security, basically secure feeling right now. We have that card in our hands in this big game.
On the way to Estonia, a stop in Cesis. The quiet Latvian town has a castle founded in 1209 by German crusaders. The master of the powerful Livonian order was based here. The knights ruined the castle to deny it to Russian troops during the 16th century Livonian War. Sweden won Latvia and Estonia. The Swedish king let the German nobles keep their privileges and their downtrodden serfs as long as they stayed loyal and paid taxes. Estonia, Eesti in the local language, is the smallest Baltic country. Of its 1.3 million people, a third live in Tallinn. It's a flat but beautiful land with 4,000 lakes and 1,521 islands. The beach and gentle bay make Pärnu, south of Tallinn, a favorite summer resort for many Europeans. Soviet leader Yuri Andropov had a summer house at Pärnu. The Tallinn government chose shock therapy to jerk Estonia from Soviet collectivism to dog-eat-dog Western enterprise overnight. The 1990s were chaotic. Pasha Basarov says the economy is still shaky, but the future-minded government has put all its services in the cloud, online. The New Yorker magazine dubbed Estonia the Digital Republic. Estonians invented Skype. Of course, not everybody is on board with all the high-tech emphasis. Tallinn, called Reval by the old German ruling class, is a graceful, well-preserved city of 400,000. It's socially advanced, offering free public transport to registered residents. With trade ties to Finland, Estonia was the most westernized of USSR republics. The 1980 Moscow Summer Olympics held the boating events here. Fast ferry service links Tallinn with Helsinki. Finns come to shop at bargain prices, while 2/3 of Estonia's doctors work part-time in Finland to make ends meet. Tallinn's population is 35% Russian. Anneli Kritzman told us that 80% of these ethnic Russians do not have Estonian citizenship. Like Pasha, our Tallinn-born tour director, many Estonian Russians choose stateless passports, or they keep Russian citizenship to avoid hassling with visas when visiting relatives to the east. They did liberate us from the Nazis, but they forgot to leave, Kritzman said. Still, she added, we could have been more sensitive to them. Advanced as Tallinn is, you can see some of the most impressive medieval defense walls in Europe. The 500-year-old walls loop for a mile and a half. Toompea, Cathedral Hill, the historic upper town, where Tallinn began. A successor castle to the founding 1219 Danish fortress towers over Parliament, the Riikikogu. Across the square, the spectacular Russian Orthodox Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, part of Tsar Nicholas's 1900 campaign to Russify Estonia, stirs mixed emotions in patriots. The Lutheran Cathedral, burial place of the rich, is a short walk from the office of Prime Minister Jüri Ratas. Also on the hill, Kiek in de Kok. That's Low German for peep into the kitchen. The German aristocrats who lived up here used this tower to spy on the antagonistic lower town German merchants they literally looked down upon. A downhill walk to the lower town, equally scenic. The Viru Street Promenade leads to Town Hall Square. The Gothic Town Hall dates from 1404. The weather vane, called Old Thomas, is relatively new, from 1530. There is a hint of Dutch architecture in the square. And if you need a drugstore, this pharmacy has been there since 1422. So if you buy a bottle of medicine here, you might want to check the expiration date. You demand monuments? Tallinn has Freedom Square and Seaside Rusalka, mourning victims of a maritime disaster. A bust of Gustav Ernesson, father of Estonian song, faces the historic arena of the singing revolution. Big-name Western stars have headlined here since independence. We rode the tram to the upscale Kadriorg district and its popular park. Springtime lilacs and horse chestnuts were flowering. In the park, Catherine Palace, built by Peter the Great for his wife, while he supervised construction from this cottage, crafting his own boots that tourists can see. Tsar Nicholas II once spoke from the palace balcony. Steps away, the presidential palace, where Kersti Kaljulaid carries out her ceremonial duties and keeps an eye on foreign policy. At Kumu, the park's museum of Estonian art through history, Pasha turns art critic with a scholarly lecture.
Because the technique is called pointillism, then you will. And there was no need, because there was a home depicted in stones, but therefore was a devout and
Good old Soviet socialist realism climaxes our museum visit, and we prepare to leave the northern light of the Baltics, fortified by knowledge that a harrowing history does not define the sea's resilient peoples.
My main impression from here is really feeling the sense of freedom and liberation in the Baltic republics from the Soviet occupation. The 50 years that they had endured under this, I really feel much more than in Poland, in terms of the relief that they are done with it, that they are freer, although we know that it's not over because the interference and the danger is always here. And I feel that too, that they actually are kind of a set of sitting ducks.
We try to stay informed, we try to observe what's happening, and so this is all we actually can as a small country in between big power.
You can live in fear or you can try to live happy. So it's better to try to live happy. If it happens, happens. We'll see.
Oi įveita į karštų, cepelinų sverda, pretikuoji poikis jo pats siaulynis vartų, astinės visos močių